Welcome, writers, readers, and friends to the Authors Talking Bookish podcast. I'm Donna Norman Carbone, author of All That Is Sacred.
And I'm Hope Gibbs, author of Where the Grass Grows Blue.
We're two debut writers traditionally published by a small publishing house, bringing to you all the experiences that we as authors learn the hard way, so you don't have to.
We'll give you insights from the inception of a book idea to publication and beyond. And along the way, we'll share our love of books from the writer's perspective.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to episode 39. Today, we're going to be talking about the mystique of book reviews and book blurbs. I'm Donna Carbone, and I'm joined by Hope Gibbs. How are you today, Hope?
I'm great, Donna. How are you?
I am well.
I'm excited about this episode. Just because book reviews, as you and I know firsthand, they make an author's book. I mean, without the reviews, the sales just don't happen. And so book reviews for authors are important, but they're also very important for readers as well. And I'm excited to talk about that component of it.
Yeah, I know. I'm happy that we're kind of doing two reader-centric episodes back to back. And I think that's pretty cool. Because as writers, we're also readers.
Oh, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that last year, I think my Goodreads count came in right at 40. So it's nothing compared. I mean, I have Facebook friends and Goodread friends. They can read upwards to 100 to 200 books a year, and I'm in awe. I mean, obviously, they're not watching television, which I've been doing quite a bit of. And you and I, it was funny. We were talking about some of the TV shows that we have found while we were both sick. So, the funny thing is, a lot of those shows were based on books.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of books, what are you reading?
So, I hate to admit this. I hate that I did not read this when I was younger, but I have started. I'm in the reading 1984 by George Orwell, and to say that it is disturbing it's an understatement. And I'm glad that I'm reading it now as an adult. I wish I had as a teenager, but I'll be honest with you, I don't know if it would have bothered me back in the 80s when I was a teenager. I don't think that I would have gotten it, especially with kind of the way the world is right now. And it is disturbing. You and I've talked about this. I think that you even teach this book. And I think we're even going to talk about it because I think, is this the 75th anniversary of this book?
Yeah, it is.
Yes. So I'm not going to tell anyone what to read, but if you want to be scared to death, read this book. I don't even know where to begin to talk about this book.
Yeah, I read this book in 1983 when I was in high school.
Yeah.
And I hated it. It didn't seem at all relevant to me.
Yeah.
And so I teach British literature, and I brought it back in 2016 when it became very relevant. And so I do highly recommend that people read this book because I think you'll be a better informed citizen if you do.
Yeah. And to think it was written 75 years ago.
Yeah.
But, so tell me, what are you reading? I hope it's a little bit happier than what I'm reading.
Well, you know what? I wouldn't say happy is the word. It's called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. And this was recommended to me by one of my colleagues because another course that I teach is AP Language and Composition. And this is a really interesting book. George Saunders is a writer. He's also a professor of writing. So he works with a lot of writing students. And so this book, he takes 4 Russian short stories written by Russian authors, and he really breaks them down, like page by page, breaks them down into kind of, what is the writer asking us as readers to do here? What are the writer's moves throughout this short story, which is exactly the lens that I teach AP Lang and Composition from. So it's really interesting. I've read a handful of pieces of Russian literature. I read Dr. Zhivago, which I absolutely loved. I read Anna Karenina, which is like a
Mhm.
huge book, but
Yeah.
love that story. And Lolita, which is super spicy if you're
Mhm.
interested in a real spicy story. But I'm really enjoying these short stories, and I'm enjoying the way that he breaks them down. And I'm also kind of like the teacher in me is kind of anticipating how he's going to break them down to see how similar his thinking is to my thinking. So I may incorporate this into my class next year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I love the cover, but the title, I'm gonna pull it back up for those who are
Yeah.
watching us on, YouTube. A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. I
Yeah.
gotta say, I very interesting.
Yeah.
So, Donna, let's talk about why we're here.
Yeah.
So, as we talked about earlier, we're talking about book reviews and book blurbs. So, let's just get right into it. Book blurbs. They are for first impressions. They can help with sales. They have it helps you set with expectations, and it's a highlighting endorsement. So, Donna, talk to us about author blurbs.
Yeah, I think book blurbs are super important. They're usually very short, a sentence or two max. As an author, we rely on them to kind of give some kind of credence to our books from other authors. So
Yeah.
we reach out to authors. In the past, I have reached out to authors that I both know and some reaches, like they tell you kind of reach for the stars. Like
Mhm.
if you could get anybody to blurb your book, who would you ask? And so I've done that and haven't gotten anything back from those authors, but I would still encourage writers to try. Um, and they show up on the book cover sometimes,
Mhm.
the book jacket. You could use them in your marketing. I use them in my marketing all the time. In fact, I just put a Facebook ad together for Valentine's Day, and I used a blurb on my ad.
Yeah.
So you can use them for many, many different purposes.
Yeah, so
Um,
your book blurbs are going to come from authors, or if it's a nonfiction, people who are experts in that field. And I know that this was one of the things. There were so many things that were overwhelming to me being a debut novelist. Getting the blurbs were
mm,
I was a little panicked because I was like, who am I going to get? So the first thing that I did is I wrote a letter to each author, and it
mhm,
wasn't just a standard letter. I specifically explained why I was looking for their blurb, what I liked about their books. I didn't ask an author who I had not read their books to blurb mine because
mhm,
I also wanted, I was so excited because I got Julie Cantrell, who I absolutely loved
mm,
her books, and she agreed to do that. And Donna, you were one of my book blurbs. I blurbed you as well. Um, and so I was just going to show an example. So this was one of your book blurbs, and you got one from Barbara Connery,
mhm,
USA Today best-selling author of Nowhere Near Goodbye. And this is a little bit longer of a blurb, but you can adjust it to what you're saying for your sales
yeah,
for your book ads. And so, like for me, like I said, I got one from Julie Cantrell. I also got one from Cindy Dormany. And so it just kind of helps give you a little bit of credibility that
yeah,
of your book.
yeah, yeah. We are so grateful to the people who blurb for us. And in return, I have been asked to blurb for other authors, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to do that because I kind of put myself back to where I was as a debut author. And like
Yes.
you, I was kind of panicked. I did the same thing. I kind of wrote kind of a query letter to each of the
Mhm.
authors, kind of followed the query format, but like you completely personalize them.
Yes.
And, you don't know when to send the letter. You want to make sure you're going to send it in enough time to like get them a copy of your book, but you want to make sure you get them a proofread copy of your book, especially the higher caliber author. You want
Yes.
to get them a more polished version than, if I were to ask you to blurb, I wouldn't be as concerned about getting the proofread version. Um, So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a very important, I think, and necessary ish
Yes.
part of being an author.
Yes, and the other thing to remember is always ask if you're asking an author how they want the format. Some of them only want a hard copy. They want a hard copy of your book, or some might be okay with a PDF or where they can put it into their Kindle. So that's one of the one of the things you do ask, and also, just basic manners. You thank them afterwards. You don't have to give them a gift. I did send flowers to the ones who did because flowers were kind of important in my story, but you
Yeah.
should at least acknowledge them. And so these blurbs, I've used them on, if you go to my Amazon page, there is a whole thing of author blurbs. There's a section
Mhm.
of it. I used it for marketing, for,
Mhm.
as you said, Facebook ads. I have used them for just, content on Instagram and on when I used to be on Twitter. So it's very important authors can use those blurbs. But there
Mhm.
was an article that just came out about how Simon and Schuster, there's an imprint, and they are no longer requiring authors to get blurbs. Donna, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I kind of like the idea of getting blurbs because I think they're quick little statements that will give readers a slice of what the book is about
Yeah.
without having to read a long review.
Yeah, and some authors I didn't get my blurbs as early because I didn't have a final copy of my book until almost right at publication, and that's
Right.
not always with small presses. It just happened to be for me because my book was being pushed through because of my audiobook deal, and they were the ones pushing my date. But
Mhm.
if a lot of these books, you can get those blurbs actually on the cover, and if you get a really big author, that can really that's a eye catcher for any reader. I know that a
Yeah.
blurb will catch my eye as well. If some of my favorite authors, if they blurbed it, I'm like,
Right.
well, I'm gonna maybe at least pull that book off the shelf and read the back cover.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree.
So
So, let's talk about how reviews are different than blurbs and can also be very beneficial to an author before we
yes.
get into how to write a book review.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about book reviews, Donna.
Sure.
Um, this was something that I didn't do before I got my
Mm.
book deal. I would read all these books and I never thought to write a review on a book. First off, I think it was a lack of understanding how important book reviews are. But
Yeah.
also, and I know this sounds crazy from someone who wrote a 90,000 word manuscript,
Mm.
I was intimidated on how to write a book review.
Yeah.
So, talk about your experiences on writing book reviews. And this is from the reader's perspective as much as anything. We're not even going to talk about it is important to authors, but let's talk about for our readers out there,
Yeah.
because this can become a hobby or it can
Mhm.
actually become a lucrative kind of a second job or a full time job.
Yeah. I really did not write book reviews prior to becoming a debut author unless I had strong feelings about a book that I wanted to express.
Yeah.
I was on Goodreads probably for about 5 years before becoming an author, and I was pretty active on that. I would, set my yearly goals and check in with other people that I knew, my friends, whether they're, actual friends in real life or friends that I met through Goodreads to see what they were reading. I used it mostly as a recommendation service. But one thing that I would always do is I would always give it a star rating.
Mhm.
And so we'll talk about that in a little bit too, like how do you give a star rating? But yeah, I didn't realize the importance to authors until I became a debut author. And
Yeah.
now it's one of the most important things
Yeah.
because it really does push your book along to have a lot of reviews.
Yeah, there are algorithms that when your book gets to so many reviews
Yeah.
that certain let's talk I mean Amazon, they will
Yeah.
maybe push your book up a little bit higher into cuz
Mhm.
there's always on your Amazon page, cuz I do buy a lot of books on Amazon, and you liked this, you might like this. And
Right.
so hitting those big marks, like, hitting the 100, hitting the
Mhm.
500, hitting
Mhm.
1,000, those are really important.
Yeah.
But again, we're not here to talk about the importance to authors. Let's talk about if this is something you want to do. And again, I was very nervous on, well, how do I go about this? So one of the first things you can do, and this is how to write a book review from a reader's perspective, is take notes while you're reading the book. I know a lot of people would put post-its
Mhm.
on a page so they can go back to it, and then you can start with a hook, like something that really stuck with you in this book. And then you can go on to summarize the plot. You can also evaluate elements, and then you can do character analysis. Are
Mhm.
those some of the kind of the things that you do when you're reading a book? Are you reading it with a critical mind on how you're going to give this book a review?
I don't think I don't think that's top of mind when I'm reading, but there are certain things about a book that will stand out to me, and I know that those will be things that I'm going to want to mention in a review. I try to look for things that will entice other readers to read it. I will look for similarities. For some reason, I just my the way my mind works, I'm always making connections. Like this book reminds me of this because
Yeah.
of this. And so I feel like because I do that, that maybe other people do too. So I just actually wrote content for one of my posts that I'm going to put this week on Instagram because a friend of mine has a book releasing on Tuesday.
Oh,
And I in the content of it, I related her book to another author. So that's another thing that I will do sometimes. Like if you like, and this author's name is Marion Keyes. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's an Irish author and she writes real funny stuff. Um, Quirky funny stuff.
hmm,
And so I said, if you're a fan of Marion Keyes's work, you'll really love this book. So
yeah,
I'll try to do that as well. Um, but yeah, and everything else that you mentioned as well. I am somebody who reads with a highlighter. So I will highlight quotes that
yeah,
stand out to me. As you guys can see, I have this quote wall
I love that wall.
and I will add things to that quote wall
Yeah.
from books that I read.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
some other things as some more tips for helping you write that review, as you were talking about the style and the tone.
Mhm.
Another thing that's really important, and I do this with mine, is personal experience, how, the book affected me. And
Mhm.
then these are the two things that I really wanted to talk about, the rating system and how to share them on the platforms.
Yeah.
So for me, I read more books than I put on Goodreads because
Mhm.
I have a real hard time ever giving a book anything less than I would never give a book on Goodreads less than 4 stars, and I
Mhm.
rarely give 4 stars. I usually do 5 stars.
Mhm.
It's just something that is, for me, because just because I may not like a book does not mean that that book is not valuable and does not have worth, and someone else may not have the same experience. So
Mhm.
if I don't like a book, I don't review a book. What about you,
Yeah.
Donna?
Um, well, I my rationale has changed a little bit since I've become an author, and I'm like living in the author's spot.
Yeah.
So I would have given books 1 and 2 star reviews in the past if I didn't like them. I don't do that anymore from an author's perspective. I will give a 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
And my rationale is a 3 is a well-written book that people will like, that I think people will like. Maybe not me so much.
Yeah.
Um, it's a book that probably I got all the way through, but maybe won't be the most memorable read for me.
Mhm.
A 4 is a good solid book,
Yes.
one that I would recommend, and a 5 is a well-written book that will live in my mind for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
that's my justification.
I totally get that, and
Mm.
it's funny because on Goodreads is notoriously known as being a little bit more critical and harder on authors than, say, Barnes& and Noble or even, say, Amazon.
Yeah.
You rarely find a book that is higher on Goodreads than it would be on Amazon. And that's been my experience with my book. It's
Yeah.
interesting because the Goodread community, they take it very seriously. And not that Amazon they don't, but a 3-star in Goodreads is not necessarily a bad thing. And so those are some interesting things. But once you've written your review, where do you
Mhm.
share them? So I share all of my book reviews that I would do, especially when before my book came out. I would always put it on my Goodreads. Obviously,
Mhm.
I would put it on Instagram. I would put it on Facebook, and I noticed Facebook didn't get the traction because I think that there you have to know your audience. So I kind of stopped using Facebook for book reviews. But there's a whole community within Instagram called Bookstagram.
Yeah.
And, people love that space. And if you want to start writing your book reviews, you can, get a nice following out of that.
Right. And for those of you who are on TikTok, TikTok has
Yes.
Book Talk, which is huge. And there are people that I follow on there, and that's all they do are review books.
Hmm.
There are people who make careers out of reviewing books. And, it takes a lot of time and dedication to do that. Certainly, reading a book is not something that you do quickly. Some people, many people do it more quickly than I do. But, I think there are people out there who become book influencers and do make a side job out of
Yeah.
that. We had a few episodes ago, we interviewed 3 Bookstagrammers, and
Yeah.
one of them was Susie Leopold from Susie Approved Tours that Hope and I both used.
Yes.
And she makes a side business out of organizing book tours for authors.
Yeah. And, some great tools if you are thinking about doing this, with Instagram, it's a visual social media. So, you obviously need a picture of the book. And when I first started, I was like, oh no, because I read so many books on my phone.
Mm,
How am I going to get a cute picture? And the way I started doing things was through Canva, and I
yeah.
can't or some kind of place where you can do your own graphics, and it makes a huge thing. With Canva, you can also add like stars, or you
Mm,
can add these cute little arrows that says, all the things like suspenseful or, exciting, amazing, and so
mm,
you can really play along, and you can come up just as we've talked about with author brand, you know,
mhm,
there you can be a bookstagrammer, have your own brand, have your own fonts, your
mm.
colors, the way that you review a book. And again, think about what kind of brand that you want to put out there. So let's talk about what are some of the benefits of writing reviews. And one of the biggest benefit is you improve your writing skills. Don't you find, Donna, that that is something that's kind of helpful with your writing, is to take a big book,
Mm.
condense it, and I found it intimidating, but the more I did it, the better my writing got.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's one of the hardest things I think is creating a concise summary for a book
Yes.
jacket.
Yeah.
So, and that does help you kind of whittle it down.
And then obviously, as we've talked, it supports authors. And so that's always great. But it also helps you with networking opportunities. You could maybe become a book influencer, and also you can promote diverse voices, or you
Mhm.
can also promote books from authors that may not be as well known as, the ones from the bigger publishers.
Yeah.
So there's so many benefits of writing writing reviews, but again, you can turn this into a hobby, or you could turn this, as we talked about Susie and others, you can turn this into a business and a career.
Yeah. And also you're networking. You're building your own little book community
Yes.
as well. Because people will follow you. You'll start to meet people who like genres that you
Hmm.
do. And so that's one benefit. One thing that I wanted to mention that I think is something that book reviewers don't realize is that you don't have to have purchased a book on Amazon in
Hmm.
order to review it on
Yeah.
Amazon. What I do, no matter where I've purchased it, I will Usually go to Goodreads first and put my review there. I'll copy and paste it
Mhm.
to Amazon, to Barnes and Noble, to BookBub, because those are all the places that are going to help authors. And so I think that that is a misconception, is that, well, I didn't buy it on the Barnes and Noble website. Why would I review it there? You review it there because it's helpful for the writers who wrote the book, and it's helpful for other readers too. Like if
Yeah.
there's a new book that I'm not sure about, I will go through and I will take a look at the reviews and see what people are saying.
Yeah. So Donna, we could sit here and talk about this all day, but
Yeah.
again, we are a podcast. We try to keep it under 30 minutes. Can you give us our due now for this episode?
Yeah, I think your due now should be to take a look at reviews of books that you really like. Come up with a system for yourself.
Yeah.
As we mentioned before, like the star rating, I would think about, what does a 3 mean to me? What does a 4 mean? And, establish a system for yourself and start writing.
Yeah. And as always, everyone, you guys can find us at authorstalkingbookish.com. We're on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and YouTube. And before we end this episode, Donna, I'm really excited about our next episode. Can you give us a little
Yeah.
sneak peek into that one?
Sure. It's our first interview of the season, and it's with an author. Her name is Sarah Lynn Bruck, and she is the author of Light of the Fire. That is her most recent book that has come out. And she's going to talk to us about book publishing, traditional publishing, self-publishing, and her newest book. So we're really excited to have her in the studio and have a conversation with her.
Well, as always, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, see you, Donna.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Hope Gibbs.
And I'm Donna Norman Carbone. It's time for you to get to work.
We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks with another tip from your author friends.